All right. So thank you, Alana, for agreeing to come on the Finally Free podcast. Let's address the elephant in the room. I'm Alana. You're Alana. I'm from
Yes,
Jersey. You're from Jersey.
yes,
You have a podcast called The Codependent Perfectionist, and I am a recovering codependent
yeah.
perfectionist. Like, this could not be better. I think we're kindred spirits or like soul partners, or I don't even know.
Possible we knew each other in another lifetime.
We must have. And the more I speak to people, the more I'm starting to think there is such a thing as past
Yeah,
lives. It just makes sense.
yeah,
But I'm so happy to have you here and to really kind of dig into codependent perfectionism and how it, relates to disordered eating. So just to kind of go back to the very beginning to see how you got where you are,
yeah.
what was your relationship like to food and your body growing up?
Oh my gosh. A really funny thing actually comes to mind that I don't think I've ever shared this, but I'm going to share it. One time in my life when I was young, I saw a therapist because I really wanted to, as like a therapy geek myself. And I remember saying to her, like, this is a terrible thing to say, but I said, if I didn't love food so much, I think I'd have an eating disorder. And what I meant by that, which this crazy comment as a teenager that I made, was that I knew that my patterns were they were so disordered in themselves, like so rigid and so perfectionistic. And I knew that about myself. And it's, my relationship with um, perfectionism has been a struggle throughout my whole life, and food naturally to me plays into that because it impacts our appearance, and most perfectionists struggle with needing to look perfect. So naturally to me it's a part of it off the bat. And that's something that I'm open about, that I struggle with. Like, that's a part of my perfectionism right there. Like, I want to look perfect just like everybody else, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard in a society that's telling you you have to.
Right.
And there's this rat race comparison thing happening. And it's actually really funny you said that. I didn't remember that I had said something so similar when I was a teenager. Because I loved food and I was always the kid that, I was so small, but I always had a very hearty appetite, and people would comment on that. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, if I didn't love food so much, I'd have it. And then lo and behold, in my early 20s, I would have one. So that
Right.
was, kind of sick foreshadowing right there. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so, so what was the inspiration to kind of get your license as a mental health counselor and start Alana Carvalho therapy? I know you said just before that you were always kind of into therapy.
So my story is that I always knew that I was going to be a therapist. I remember saying at 5 years old, like, I'm going to be a therapist. I don't know how I even knew what that was at the time, but I just always knew I was meant to help people in that way. So for me, it kind of naturally just all kind of fit into place. But what really jump started my actual work as a therapist, and what I now how I call myself the codependent perfectionist and all of that, was really like my own therapeutic journey. That not that one when I was a teenager, but when I really dove in my 20s. And that's what kind of kicked everything off, because I realized the severity of what was going on for me. And my reasoning for going to therapy at that time, I remember sitting there and going, well, I need to go to therapy because I'm going to become a therapist. And I knew I needed it, but I didn't really get what was actually going on for me, until my therapist really helped me see it, and made me aware of my codependency and my perfectionism. And although it was a really hard pill to swallow at that time, it's that awareness has really helped me help other people see it themselves.
Right. And you said you feel like you're kind of still in recovery for that, right?
I think it's a lifelong thing. I mean, as most issues that we struggle with, and throughout time, it's not like it's something that just suddenly goes away. But it's something for me that, I mean, I'm in such a different place than I was back then. I mean, God, it's like an entirely different person. But it doesn't mean those issues don't come up for me every day in some way. They're just not as, big or heavy, which I imagine you can relate to in your own recovery process.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm very candid on Instagram when that happens. I had a day couple of months ago where I got news that my son had to have surgery. He's 15 months old, and I
Oh,
felt so out of control with that situation that I had all of a sudden I had the urge to weigh myself, and I hadn't weighed myself in Lord knows how long.
right,
And you have those slips, but they don't last as long.
right,
You know why you have that impulse to do whatever disordered thing it is. You can talk yourself down from it. So like you said, it's not that we don't have the thoughts, that we can't control the thoughts that we have when they kind of pop up, but we know what to do with them.
right. And I also think, like, two things come to mind. One is that people are often unaware that they think, like, okay, when I've worked through something therapeutically, that means it should be always in a better place. And the reality is we go through various transitions in life that really bring a whole new level to whatever it was we were struggling with before. And then oftentimes, like, we have to kind of re-go through the recovery process. So for example, for me, having children brought up all of my codependency and perfectionism issues again in a way that I hadn't experienced previously. So it's not like when that happened, I was all of a sudden starting at square one, but it could feel that way sometimes when I was like in the thick of it and like, wow, this is something I struggled with like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and that happens. That's a natural part of the process.
Yeah.
So there's that piece of it, and exactly what you're saying too. That my therapist always used to say to me, Alana, it's not that I'm not judgmental. It's that I have the judgments and then I kind of laugh at them. And that to me kind of relates to all the different distorted thinking patterns that we have that like we don't people think the work is like to poof get rid of them, but it's really not that. It's that we create more space between them so we don't necessarily believe them anymore.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Now we've been saying the word codependent and codependency a lot already. Can we just define what that is just for people who maybe don't know?
Sure. And whenever I get this question, I'm like, God, it's so hard to define sometimes, but like the real like basic piece of it is a desire to change somebody else's behavior, experience, or feelings. Really, that's kind of the basis of it, more or less. And then how that manifests can look all sorts of different ways. Um, but it's really like a desire to change to change what is, in a sense.
Okay. And how does that go hand in hand with perfectionism, and how is perfectionism formed? What are the different things that can happen to a person to kind of make them that way?
So I think there's various ways that it kind of goes hand in hand together. I think the main thing is that both in codependency and in perfectionism, there's a feeling of not being good enough as is, right? Like not trusting or loving ourselves the way that we are and feeling like we need to be different. And trying to, in a sense, almost like earn our care and love from other people by behaving a certain way or trying to look a certain way or work a certain way, and so that in a sense, and sometimes I'll say perfectionism can be like relation. How do I say this? Codependency is relational perfectionism in a sense, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
they really do like go hand in hand. And a lot of it, it stems from our childhood. It stems from the different experiences that we've had, our personalities that we had coming into this lifetime. And oftentimes we can kind of connect it back to our early parenting, and sometimes it can happen from having a narcissistic parent or a parent who really struggles with mental health. It can also happen from just having like a really severely perfectionistic or codependent parent, all of that stuff. So it's never, all of this is never one thing. It can be a mix of many different factors.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. And now, could we also uh, differentiate between perfectionist and high achiever, and how maybe they overlap, but also how they're different?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in my recovery, I'm still a high achiever, if that makes sense. And I
Yeah, oh
think
yeah.
perfectionists, the difference really, in a sense, is that a perfectionist never sees anything as good enough, right? Like it doesn't matter what we achieve, it's never good enough. Even if we set the goal and get there, we're still like, but maybe I could have done better, or let me move the goal again, or whatever it is that we do for ourselves, right? Um, I think a lot of people get nervous that if they don't have that high, really high bar set for themselves, that they actually will lose their desire to achieve. And I don't think that that's true at all. I think actually, in a sense, you kind of gain a really more connected desire to achieve. It's not about the actual achievement. It's about, like, for me now, I have fun with it. Like, it's a fun thing for me to achieve and to do. And but it's not about like how I rate myself because of it. It doesn't, I don't have to make it mean something about me. And that is really what creates a difference. And then I can celebrate when there's something fun or exciting that happens, but I don't have to make the negative be something that's really, like really icky and something I hold on to and say, well, that means something about me.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
does that make sense what I'm
Yeah,
saying there?
you're separating yourself from your achievements.
Right.
Your identity isn't wrapped up in what you're doing or what you're trying to achieve. It's kind of like this awesome bonus that you enjoy doing. And it sounds a lot like what I do. Like
Hmm.
when I reach a goal, I'm like, oh, that's great. And I'm
Hmm.
on to the next thing because I actually enjoy the process and
Yes.
the chase, so to speak. I really enjoy
Yeah.
that. It's a lot
Yeah.
of fun. And once I realized about myself, it helped me let go of the end goal
Mhm.
for
Right.
sure. Um,
Absolutely.
now,
Oh, go ahead.
okay, I was gonna say where, you were saying the icky stuff. You don't make the icky stuff, or the negative emotions that can crop up in the way to achieving your goal. You don't make that mean anything about yourself. Where do you think those icky thoughts or those negative beliefs or limiting beliefs come from?
I think most commonly it comes from various authority figures in our life. I don't think it's just ever one person,
Hmm.
but oftentimes people will say like, when I ask them about who it may be that's speaking that to them, they'll say, oh, well, it's me. Right. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's become you because you've internalized somebody else's voice. Right.
Hmm.
But that voice could be the voice of a coach, a teacher, a parent, an aunt, a grandparent. There's many different people in our life that influence us really heavily. And sometimes, like, if you can just allow yourself to go back to some of those memories and see, and they're not always exact, like people will say, oh, but nobody ever said to me like that's not good enough. And I'm like, it's not always that someone says that exact thing. Sometimes it's an energy, sometimes it's a lack of acknowledgement of this thing that you did. And sometimes it's actually just seeing your parent do it to themselves. So, it's not even if you had, like, for example, an authority figure who was extremely loving towards you and was like, you did a great job and all of that loving stuff, but you saw them beat themselves up or hold themselves to high standards, you can still very easily internalize that voice because that is a mirror for you and
Right.
you're learning from that, right? So, don't try to think of it so binary if you're struggling with trying to conceptualize where this voice might be stemming from.
Right. And now, so how does this all kind of lead into body image issues or eating disorders? How can codependency and perfectionism manifest itself in that way?
It's interesting. I did a podcast on codependency and coping with food. And I think there's one right there, right? Um, and that might be something that's less maybe commonly thought of, because when immediately, of course, when we think of perfectionism, we think of what I shared before, which is like the need to look in this perfect way that society says is like the right way to look, right? And that for sure is a big part of it. But that can come out in so many different ways. Um, also the codependency piece, for example, if part of our big codependency issues was really trying to like please one of our parents or authority figures, which that is true for many of us. Part of that is wrapped up in our body image, right? Like, we have been taught that we get acceptance if we look a certain way, right? And that, or we don't get acceptance if we don't look a certain way. And so I see it go two ways. You have like the perfectionists who really try to look right, quote unquote, and do it perfectly. And then you have the ones that do the opposite and are kind of like, F you to this. But both of those people are often in reaction to the same thing.
Right.
And so it can look different, but often at the root, you're feeling unloved in your own body and for who you are.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And as you said before, if you're someone who struggles with perfectionist tendencies or codependency and or body image issues and disordered eating, even if you don't put those onto your children, they can see you do it to yourself and figure, well, maybe that's how I should be acting toward myself, or maybe that's how they want me to act. So I know that you specialize, your business focuses on helping patients raise empowered children,
Hmm.
especially if the parents are codependent perfectionists. So can
Right.
you speak to um, how that happens, or maybe one actionable strategy to be a better parent if you are a codependent perfectionist?
Sure. Yeah, I think, whenever I'm thinking about this, I think about a parent listening who is then going to beat themselves up over what I'm saying because they're doing it wrong.
Mm.
And I don't want anyone to be beating yourself up because you're doing it wrong, because well, the reality is we're all doing it wrong in some sense of the word, right? And we have to be compassionate for where we struggle. So I don't, you know, it's not that everyone here that's listening needs to become the perfect role model and say, oh my God, because I'm struggling with body image or an eating disorder, whatever it is, like I'm a terrible parent. No, actually, I think when we struggle with those things, but we show our children what it looks like to work on ourselves, that could actually be really
Oh yeah.
beautiful and healing for both people, right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece of it. Um, in my book, I talk a lot about what it looks like to be codependent and a perfectionist and how that translates into parenting. And oftentimes it's like this really, you think of the typical like helicopter parent who's kind of just there, like hovering, waiting for something to happen with their children. And so a lot of the work that I do is to help parents take like a step back in their parenting
Mhm.
so that they can create better connections with their children. And by the way, that these aren't just children; these are often adult children I'm talking about too. Um, so the work is often just creating space and allowing your children to go through their own struggles, to feel the feelings that they're having, whatever it may be that they're dealing with, to not feel you're going to feel whatever you're going to feel, but to not actually act on the feelings to try to rescue them from it. And again, that's the separation. Most of us have those feelings, but it's trying to work on actually not acting on them and letting our child struggle and helping them feel heard from us. That's actually like the best thing that we can really do for them.
It's how is having them feel like they're being heard and that their emotions are validated, right?
Right. Yeah, because most of the time what we do, like communication wise as a codependent, is someone tells us something and then we tell them like what they should do about it. Like we give them, like they're like, I don't know what I should do about this, and then we're like, well, I can tell you what to do about it. And instead of letting them kind of just kind of talk it out and empowering them to come up with their own idea of how to work through something, which is really what we want to help them do when they're 2 years old all the way to when they're in their 40s, like, whatever age you're at with your kids, you want to be helping them feel that they can take care of themselves, and that they can also reach out to you for support. You don't want to not I'm not saying we don't want to support our children, but we want them to learn how to ask us for support, and we want them to know how to come up with solutions to difficult situations, and also learn to feel their feelings.
Right. Would you say
Most of us
maybe a line of questioning would be better? Like if the child comes to you, whatever their age, and says like, I don't know what to do about XYZ, would probing them with questions so they can kind of dig into their own line of thinking and reasoning, is that helpful?
it can be, but one of the things that I go over in the book is really the concept of mirroring, which is like really just in a sense, it's a bit different than parroting, but many people think that's what it is. But it's really just helping our child like hear themselves. So if they come to us and say, like, I had a fight with my friend, maybe just saying something along the lines of, oh, so you had a fight with your friend, right? So you're kind of just like repeating it back to them. And then generally, when they actually hear that, this is actually what everybody needs, but that's an aside. But when they can hear themselves, they can start to work through it, and then that allows them to get greater clarity, and then they know when they need to say, yeah, what do you think I should do about it, and then we can offer our feedback,
Okay, okay, that's
because
really
we've been
good.
invited to. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And for those who don't have kids that are listening, but they identify as being a perfectionist, what's one actionable strategy they could start doing today to start healing that?
So what immediately comes to me is like my spiritual beliefs, which have to do with the fact that, I believe our true self, who's underneath all of this kind of stuff that we've gone through in our life, and who we've become, um, is really compassionate and understanding. And so when you hear yourself with the negative thoughts that are coming in, and then really negative feedback, um, I want you just to think about the fact that those those thoughts, those sentiments are not actually coming from your true self, because your true self is actually very loving and kind and really accepts you for who you are. So if you can just start to build some awareness around the negative thoughts, that's a really great step one. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to change them. Just see it.
Right, just observe.
Right.
Cool. So this one, I have two more questions. One I ask everybody at
Sure.
the end, but this one's actually for myself because I have you on the line, and I can't imagine I'm the only person that's done this, but I might be. I might be crazy. Um, I used to do this thing in my
Mhm.
head. It was almost like I felt like there was always like a camera on me, or like that I was in like a movie, and like someone was watching my every move, and like if I messed up, this
Mhm.
was so like the perfectionist tendency. When I would
Yeah.
screw up, I'd be like, all right, starting tomorrow morning when I wake up, it's going to be a fresh start, almost like a reset. Is there
Right.
like a
Right.
term for that, or like do people do that, or is it just me?
No, I think people do that. I'm thinking right now about this one client who I've worked with for years, who would tell me like when he came into therapy if it was a good week or a bad week. And like whatever however it started off, it was like he couldn't like alter what happened then, and needed to like start fresh, like you're saying, on a new week. Um the work with him has been that he's now years later at a place where it's no longer so binary. It's like, yeah, this moment can feel not great, but then I can actually choose to make it different at any point in time. And I think that comes when you start to feel really like empowered in yourself, that you have choice. You're not victim of circumstance, that it can be like, huh, I could use differently right now, not just tomorrow.
Right.
Right.
They're
And
not
so it doesn't
Monday.
have to be right, exactly. It doesn't have to be a bad day. It could be a bad moment. Um, so I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I just like that's I don't do that anymore, but I always wondered because I did it for so long, like was there a term for that? Or like I Googled it, I've tried, I couldn't find anything. So I thought maybe if there was a term, you would know, but I feel like maybe there's just no term for it. Maybe it's just part of
Well, I
perfectionism.
Yeah, I think it is a part of perfectionism that you kind of feel like you're constantly watched in a sense, rather, like you're just not comfortable with yourself in the moment and allowing things to be what they are.
Right. I feel like it's just like the voices in your head that you've internalized, like you feel like they are watching you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So the last question that I ask everybody, since this podcast is called the Finally Free podcast, what does it
Mm.
mean to you to be finally free?
Oh, oh my God. Finally free to me is getting to be exactly who I am and being unapologetic about it.
Yeah.
Like I'm a different therapist. I even joke that I'm like the Judge Judy of therapists. That's my nickname, because I can be really tough, but I'm also very loving. And my clients know that about me. And I think that that is also who I am in my life too. And doing my own therapeutic work has given me the freedom to be who I am in all aspects of my life.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
so great. Thank you so much for being on here. It was really cool to just have this connection with you. I'm
Yeah.
so glad I reached out.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. It was great to meet my kindred soul here.
All right, we will talk soon.
Sounds good.
Bye.